Welcome to the fourth podcast based on the theme of conversations concerning sustaining the craft of acting. My guest here today is Martha Jacobs, who, just to keep this very simple and to the point, is really the person who inspired me to teach. And there was long time ago, she and another young woman had been hired in a theater, and I began to work with them, and then this whole studio took off for like 25 years simply on word of mouth. And she's someone who wrote a book called A Meisner Legacy. She's an actress, a director, a writer, teacher. And so welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. It's always good to be sitting across from you.
Ditto.
Especially in this room, because there's so much history, and it's always a very exciting moment to go back to the beginning, you know. When you left this studio and started working, what was the most profound change in you in response to the work? And
I knew what I was doing. I had a craft. And I would also add that the studying of the craft grew me up.
As a person?
Yeah, I think I also changed as I learned. Matured me.
Really?
Yeah, because it was a way of learning.
Yeah.
That I had to. It was I had to apply myself and make a lot of mistakes. God knows.
You know, it's funny you bring that up, because the hardest thing for people to learn is that learning the craft of anything has to do with making mistakes. Learning about life is about making mistakes. Right. And acting is the truest and most intelligible picture of life.
Right.
So it has to reflect life. You know, you were one of my initial students. You were the initial student along with another woman.
Right.
I don't want to go into too much about that, because frankly that may be a separate story about this, about why one should teach and whatnot. But I don't know if you remember, after that tragedy, that we were at a gathering and we were avoiding each other, you and I. And you walked across the room very slowly and kind of eased your way over, and the only thing you said to me is, you know, if you don't teach, your life is a lie. Do you know that? And I said, well, thank you for that.
I don't think I was quite that arrogant. I don't think I pronounced that judgment. I think I said something like, you need to teach or you're kidding yourself, something like that.
It was something like that, and I said, thank you very much, Martha.
It's all right. It's okay, and I didn't even charge you. Yeah.
But it was true. It was true. And the class you were in set a standard right from Jump Street as to who I would work with and who I wouldn't work with, because teaching acting is an exploration and a rebirth of a craft. If you're serious about your work as a teacher and as a student, and you're not trying to be imitative in any way whatsoever. And so that class was very influential in that regard. And the most fascinating thing about your book, which I really want you to talk about a lot, is when I went back and looked at it, and I know how fastidious you were about taking things down in that room, that in fact was what I taught. And I'm going, wow, the growth it's still the same work, but the specificity of it and the clarity of it and the detail of it, of course, has changed. What did prompt you to write the book?
I looked for books to supplement what I was learning with you, and never found them. Or, the ones that I did found just didn't really do what I was looking for. And people, as I grew up and worked more and more and started to direct, started to teach, people asked me, isn't this written down somewhere? Isn't there a record of this kind of work? And I didn't feel good about the existing books that dealt with Meisner's work to refer them to, because they were so general. And the truth is that you really did refine everything.
It's funny you mentioned that, because when I refer to this whole process, where it came from, Stanislav, I'm being simplistic. I do seminars now on Tuesdays and twice a month. And I say, Stanislavski found what? Then there were the group theater masters. And out of those, for me, the most important was Meisner, because Stanislavski found that a process was needed. Meisner found what? And this is the place where how you do that has been developed, the how of it, And I think that's a fair estimate, and someone else will take it further someday. If there are people like yourself and other people who studied here over the years, especially the first 30 years, who it was an absolute necessity for them to be fully crafted. Therefore, the demands they made on me as a teacher were healthy and always creative, and demanded that I learn a way of teaching that emanated from my creativity.
Sure.
And so that it's simpatico.
Yeah. So I wrote to record what made sense to me and what made such a huge difference in my life and in my work. And I also wrote to understand it better, deeper. And really I found, because as you said correctly, I was a terrible student, right? Because I thought I knew so much coming in, right? Because I started working professionally when I was 13. So I thought just because based on the years that I'd been working that I had, I knew something, which of course was not true. What I had was an intuition, an instinct to tell me. But really I had no craft.
And you had a devout love of the theater.
Yes. And a need. I had a profound need to do this work, which I think is really important. But so, what was the question? I'm lost.
The question was,
why did I write the book?
Prompted you to write the book?
Right. Yeah. So to record
Which, by the way, the name of the book is A Meisner Legacy.
Right. So to record what I learned, what I understood about what I learned, and to understand it in a deeper way, as I had to try to communicate it in words in a book. And like most people, I think, who teach, it really wasn't until I started to teach it that I really got it.
Had you begun teaching before you wrote the book? Right?
Oh, yeah. I started teaching when probably 4 years after I finished working with you for Norman Renee's company. He just wanted an introduction for the production company. Yeah, so that was just my first sort of foray. But I had been working steadily from the time that I finished the class till I started teaching that first class. And then I worked for many more years before I taught again.
Yeah. Are you working now?
I directed a show in the spring, and I'm negotiating right now to direct another one in the early summer.
Are you acting?
I have been acting whenever I can.
Good. Well, you're a person that doesn't let dust collect under your sandals. I don't know if you remember this. I'm sure you do, because I know we've talked about it, but there are a lot of influences on me as a teacher. One is Toscanini. He was a tremendous influence on me as a person. You know, I grew up with his music. I used to listen to it with my...
What is it about his person?
Well, his person and his artistry are one and the same. And I think the thing that separated him from other conductors, and I read this, I'm lifting this from an article by John Gruen, where he was interviewing Horowitz, Vladimir Horowitz, who was Toscanini's son-in-law. And Horowitz said that what separated Toscanini as a teacher, there were other great conductors who were great with specific orchestras, but Toscanini could take a fourth-reed orchestra and turn it into a first-rate orchestra. And I had it was before I ever studied acting or anything, and I had such a strong, where I'd heard that about him from my grandmother, response to that, that was so transformative in its clarity, you know. And then once I'd read that again, it just had a profound influence on me, because I think a good voice teacher will tell you that 1 out of every 10,000 people can't sing. I believe with 1 out of 20,000 actors can act. There are varying degrees of talent, but the reason is why someone wants to act. It can't be filled with ego and with reasons of vanity and narcissism, you know. And stripping that away happens mainly through the process of the work. I just hold the scraper in my hand a little bit, but it's amazing when that happens. You know, some of the people who've had the hardest time here are the most flowing actors that studied here. It's a constant learning process for me, you know.
Well, that's the fascinating thing about learning. The process of learning is so surprising. People do it in their own time.
Yeah.
And I think, and I've had to learn that over the years that I've been teaching, that it's who am I to make a judgment about anybody who wants to work, because people learn when they are ready to learn, and you just never know.
Yeah. What's the response of the people you work with at Indiana University? And you teach a master's class, am I right? What's the response of the young people to the work?
They love it.
They love it.
They love it.
Yeah.
They love it for all the same reasons that all of your students appreciate the work.
Well,
it gives a craft.
You know, as Bob Dylan said, the times they're a-changing, because as that article in the Times last Sunday it was pretty good, pointed out, people are not entering the profession for reasons of craftsmanship. They're entering the profession for reasons of celebrity, for reasons of needing to be seen, for reasons of commerciality.
You know, Bob, I read the article too, and my response was, yeah, but hasn't it always been that way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But to study here, that there were more people who were interested in craftsmanship just 10 years ago.
I think it was self-selecting, because you started out with a group of people.
That's interesting.
Who gravitated to you because of what?
False promises that they had a lot of them.
Yeah, I think that's right, and disappointment that they had previously. So I think that sometimes that grew, and that was the case for a number of years. That I know of. I don't know after a certain point of the students that you've had.
No, it was.
But for a certain
was.
point,
well, it's not as many people have the background that the people had then. For instance, I'll give an example. I don't like to use names, but Jo Beth Williams. She came to study here. She was in a production of Moon Children that many of my students had been cast in. She saw what was going on, very bright, and knew she didn't have that. She had been hired to replace a woman by the name of Carol Williard, who, at that time, neither of them were well trained, but Carol was a more facile actress. She got fired. Carol sent Jo Beth to this class. This is how silly some of this can be. And then later on, much later on, Jo Beth had Carol hired for a film called Memories of Me. And I mean, Jo Beth was really, when you think of a certain type of training that stunts your impulses, she was the product of that, But she had a love of the theater. All these people did, because they were raised on it, unlike the computer or the internet. When you can push delete, you may understand procedure, but you don't understand process, And that old saying, from an actor's point of view, it's not the end of the trip that matters, it's the trip along the way. So, but you've had an amazing trip, right? Because you've been put, tell me if you agree with this, you've been put in situations where you were allowed to practice your craft in a lot of different ways, through a lot of different things, without compromising. Would you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I've had a lot of really great opportunities, and it was actually very fortuitous that I was, because of life circumstances, I moved to Bloomington, Indiana, where I was able to do an amazing range of parts that I'm sure I would never have been, allowed to do if I'd been in a big city like New York. Mm-hmm. So, the competition would have just been. So I was able to do huge range of parts and work with all kinds of directors and be able to practice what I knew and stay true to it. And it has never failed me. It has never failed me as an actress or as a director.
That's good. That means I did my job.
I would say.
It's funny. In the 42 years since the first class completed this, only 88 people have completed this process. But
Is that right?
Yeah. But if you break it down, that's really quite a bit, because I've always been interested in quality, not quantity. And of those 88 people, maybe it's 89. I don't count them, but I think it's in the high 80s. Somewhere between 48 and 51 are still active. In some capacity, they're still active. A lot of them have had a certain amount of commercial success. A lot of them just have worked in regional theater, which is a good place to work and learn your craft. And that to me is the rewards of this in a profession where 98% of young people come to New York, have their dreams crushed, and go home on the Trailways or the Amtrak, And it wasn't that they weren't capable. It's that they didn't find the right place. And it seems, though, I know I've been very critical of some of your former training, but on the other hand, that former training enhanced a love of the theater in and of itself that you've maintained even when you don't necessarily like the acting, you still appreciate the piece.
Yeah.
You see.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I think that's true. And I really learned to respect and love the process. Mm-hmm. Really, that's what it really is all about. And the way to connection that the craft allows, connection with your other actors, with yourself, with your own sense of truth, and then with the audience, and the opportunity to transform the character work, right? So for me, those are that's the payoff.
What would you say was the thing that came hardest to you once you did feel secure in your work?
I don't know.
Maybe that's not even a clear question.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Different times, different things. You don't walk away from the class being a master, obviously.
No, you walk away being prepared to work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And really, in a certain sense, even being prepared to learn, because you learn every time you work. To work is to learn. Right. Yeah.
What's one thing you'd like to do that you haven't done?
I'd like to write something.
Well, I have several pads of paper here.
I have an idea, so we'll see.
A lot of people have written from here. A guy who's you've even spoke to, he did with another student of mine in Pennsylvania in an outdoor theater a dramatization of the core of Leaves of Grass.
Really?
Yeah. And apparently it was quite something. And he said, I'm not sure it could have happened if you didn't have two people doing it who understood this process.
That's fascinating, because there's a new play that I directed at the Phoenix Theater in Indianapolis called I and You. And it's a relationship. It's a relationship between a teenage boy and a teenage girl. But the subject really is Whitman's poem. Wow. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Whitman was an interesting guy. Interesting guy. What is it you have? Do you still maintain that need for a new adventure with what you do?
Yes.
You're going to write any more books about this?
I don't think so. Why do you think? Is there something that you feel needs to be addressed?
I've always been against writing books about acting. But as I get a little older, I begin to understand the need for that to be put out there in some capacity. I think because of the time we live in, perhaps film on that is better because it lasts, And we live in a visual society. We don't live in a literate society,
Well, I believe in books, and I think a book is always there's always a use for a book, and it's a point of view. When I wrote the manuscript of the Meisner Legacy, and I showed it to the then director of the neighborhood playhouse and asked if I could do this, to publish this legally, he said to me, yes, that Meisner had never patented any of his exercises, even though people had urged him to do so. But that he recommended that I change the name, which I had, my preliminary name was the Meisner Legacy. He said, change it to a Meisner legacy. And I thought, yeah, of course. This is just one point of view, one experience. And there's a lot, as teachers, we know that you teach the same thing, and there are 5 people in class, and they're all hearing it differently. Mm-hmm. It's just the way it is. We're all different. Mm-hmm. So my point of view is, again, my understanding of what I was taught under you. And then how that has synthesized over the decades since then.
Practice.
Right. And I would be very interested in learning other people's point of view. Mm-hmm. So I'm in favor of books, personally.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. It was funny you brought up Hal Baldridge, a really good guy. So I'll share something with you. Hal Baldridge at one time was the artistic director of a theater in Edmonton, Alberta. He also was the artistic director of the Woodstock Playhouse. When I was at the Playhouse, he was the technical director. And he somehow got a hold of the rights to Brecht's Schweiken the Second World War. And he hired an actor who, at the time, I was very close to, a fellow by the name of Philip Gushy. And he hired me for Balloon, his sidekick. And when Paul Morrison died, he was hired to take that job. He's a wonderful guy, like Morrison. Paul Morrison was a lighting designer for the group theater. He had a tremendously calming effect on a place where there was tumult because, that lovely little movie about Sandy Meisner, the most honest part about it was the prosecutor's scene, and Martha Graham was very difficult. Robert Williams was very difficult. And Paul Morrison kept the seams on the boat floating, And the same was true with Hal Baldridge. That was a real talent that he had, And he was always, like what he did with you there. I mean, he didn't know you from Adam other than you had studied with me. And
he read the manuscript.
Yeah. Right. Which he must have thought was fine.
Right.
So he was very helpful to you, just with that little moment, It's those little moments, What's the most disappointing thing that's happened to you?
In the profession?
Yeah. Well, yeah, not in your
How
life.
few people, comparatively few people, have training. Yeah, that has disappointed me, and I have been surprised at the disrespect that a lot of people have for the work. Actors showing up drunk for a performance. That has happened in my experience, and that's just, it's just not excusable. So yeah, but that's life, right? I mean, people are people, and not everybody has standards. Not everybody takes things seriously and does it for the same reason.
Yeah, I think the theater, there's this wonderful piece that William Hazlitt wrote in his book on the English stage. It's called On Actors and Acting. It's exactly what I teach. It's what this is all modeled on, really. And in it, he said, the players are the actors present the truest, this I'm paraphrasing, picture of life. They hold a glass up to humanity, frailer than life itself. They show this all that we can be, all that we dread, and all that we should be.
On and off the stage.
Yeah. And later in the piece, he says, for me, the perfect picture of felicity is to watch the roving vagabond actor dipping a dry crust of bread in a well, in a country town.
Mm.
And, you know, that sort of pursuit of an actor's life is not existent because of all the social forces in today's world that are dictating the way we live. So hopefully it will preserve itself. It's preserved itself for 450 years.
Absolutely it will. Absolutely it will.
Yeah.
People need stories. People need storytellers. People need actors. Yeah.
I mean, I was sitting at home and I don't watch much TV. I'm kind of a news junkie. So I'm flipping channels and up came The Godfather. And there was the scene in the garden. I mean, that has a history. Every time you watch that, it's like you've never seen it before, Or it's like the first time you see a Botticelli painting alone on a wall. That's what should happen. Anything else you want to say?
Thank you.
No, thank you. I think thank you, and listen, I know you'll keep me up to date, but I hope you follow up on your play. I do.
Thank you.
Because I think as life goes on.
You mean the writing?
The writing, yeah. We all have more to say and become more able to say it, Yeah. So thank you very much, Martha.
My pleasure, Bob.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, let's see how this came out.
It's a little bit long.
No, not at all. It was 32 minutes.